This is my favorite house on the planet. Can anyone name it? Does anyone know it from sight? No? Wow, are you in for the treat? It is the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. Why is this my favorite house on the planet? I'm so glad you asked. Here's an aerial shot of it. Let me tell you a bit about the Winchester Mystery House. It was built by one Sarah Winchester between 1886 and 1922. Sarah married into the Winchester family, which became wealthy off of Winchester rifles, of which an awful lot were sold during the American Civil War. Sarah lost her only child and was widowed early in life. And so, convinced that she was cursed, she did what all Victorian ladies did, and she consulted a medium, who told her that the only way to escape the malignant spirits of those killed by the Winchester rifles was to go out west and build a house that must never be completed. And so she did. From 1886 to 1922, construction never ceased, as the original 8-room farmhouse grew into the world's probably most unusual and sprawling mansion. It's 24,000 square feet. It has 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 160 rooms, 52 skylights, 47 stairways and fireplaces, 17 chimneys, 13 bathrooms, and just the 6 kitchens. It was built at a price tag valued at $5 million in 1923, or around $100 million today. In 1906, the house actually stood at 7 stories, but when the San Francisco earthquake hit, the full front of the mansion collapsed. And Sarah became convinced that the ghost thought the house was too close to completion. And so she simply nailed up the front and continued building at the back. 2 wings are complete duplicates of each other. The second one was built slightly after the other one and was better because presumably they worked out what they were doing in the first wing and decided they could just, ignore that one and do a better second one. Nothing connects in a way that makes sense. It's very hard to navigate around. There's a whole room full of glass from a San Francisco equivalent of Louis Tiffany because there weren't rooms built for it yet. There is a door to nowhere with a 10-foot drop. There are several staircases that go nowhere, or go down 3 stories to go up 1. And one of the exits that you can see on the left here from the dedicated seance room is a 6-foot drop into a scullery sink. To test for ghosts. Only ghosts could survive that. Basically, every day for 35 years, this woman woke up and decided between a 3rd ballroom or a 7th kitchen, at her whim. The style of the mansion changed with the fashion. Old rooms were closed up as new ones opened. And sometimes you could navigate to the old rooms, but they weren't updated. You can probably work out why I, a content strategist, have used the Winchester Mystery House as an analogy for enterprise websites and product suites for a while. So, after talking about this house for the best part for 15 years, a few weeks ago, I got to finally tour it myself. And I actually gained a whole new perspective on it. While it's easy to draw analogies about unplanned websites and sprawling product suites, and I'm not stopping, the details of the interior actually inspired me to think about something else I wrestle with a lot. How bad this industry still is at designing for complexity, and how we continually shy away from the realities of designing for systems of users. Why did this come to mind? Because Sarah never had to. Now, this might look like something out of a made-for-TV horror movie, but it was, in fact, an ultra-modern luxury of its time. Installed by Sarah Winchester in around 1910, this is the only shower in the mansion. It takes hot water directly from the bathroom boiler house, and it's designed for someone exactly 4 foot 10 inches, as Sarah was. And this is what I mean about what I took from my visit to the Mystery House. It's an incredibly bizarre place, but it wasn't random, necessarily. There are definite ideas behind each flight of fancy. Even the stairs to nowhere were built to trap ghosts. But it was built for one user, who also happened to be the senior stakeholder. I can only imagine how Sarah's longtime foreman felt trying to brief his builders on what they were working on that day. Yeah, so this week, we're making a long room with 13 fireplaces and a spider web made out of the hot pipes. Why? Ghosts, mate. Yeah, it's for the ghosts. But so often, I think it feels like we are left to kind of create for this one user, our dream amalgamation, happy path user, everything crafted for them, 4-foot, 10-inch height shower included. All right, so though I could fill 30 minutes easily on the joys of the Mystery House, let's bring it back to our shared work so you do have something to take back and apply maybe. All right, so just a little bit about me. I am the head of UX content strategy for corporate engineering in Google, and that is internal tools. We like to say that we build Google for Google, so everything from procurement, performance management, payroll, and other products that don't begin with P. I actually have the world's most boring portfolio. It's mostly been government services, internal tools, and enterprise software. But, like I always like to say, that's where all the gnarly problems really love to go and hang out. So there's always stuff for us to do. And one of the horrible truths of this kind of work is that it's never good. There are always compromises. You're always trying to make the least bad decision that affects the fewest number of things in the system. And to be good at it, you have to very quickly lose your rosy-tinted view that one size fits all, or that hyper-personalization is possible or affordable. Even the idea of making it easy for individual users is questionable, which I know is heresy in UX, but hang in with me here. So when I was writing the outline for this talk, I thought microcopy would be a good lens by which I examine some of these problematic design patterns. And it's probably the thing I've spoken about the most in my career. So if you don't know what microcopy is, things like validation messages, error messages, button text, character count nudges, that kind of stuff. The small lines of text that contextualize what a user is being asked to do. But I realized as I was writing this talk, what I was exploring was where microcopy was really being misused. For example, trying to paper over deeper cracks, or where it was needed, but there weren't any affordances in the design. No flex when something was more complex and users needed the right nudges. Back in 2011, I did my first big conference talk, and it was at a conference called Amnesia, which went on to become Web Directions. And it was on microcopy. Back then, UX writers were few or far between, and it was aimed at helping designers and developers not make simple mistakes writing error messages that didn't help users resolve problems. The great news is there's loads of resources out there now about microcopy. I particularly recommend Tori Podmajersky's book, Strategic Writing for UX, if you want to check out some very specific details on little bits of microcopy and how to use those good patterns. Also, I did take the opportunity at that talk to rip the piss out of the newly minted Smashing magazine for awarding this picture of a clock best 404 page on the internet. Thankfully, in the last 15 years, we have all, including Smashing magazine, improved our understanding of basic usability. And yet, with all that said, I still think we struggle to think about the systems of users we're serving and balancing their needs. Some of the so-called best practices that designers use can actually really undermine any effort to negate necessary complexity by just sweeping it away or ignoring it or kicking it to another part of the product. Just ask your local neighborhood UX content designer who then has to come along and try and explain it. And to be clear, that's my perspective. I am a UX content strategist and designer who has to try and label, define, explain, and move users through complex and often unfamiliar systems like payroll and purchasing. The established patterns of good design do not often make space for this level of complexity. So rather than rehash the known patterns of microcopy, let me talk through the ways microcopy and product UI copy, in particular, often illuminate deeper problems with the design, the experience, and even a business itself. I will talk through the promised rogues gallery of bad patterns, but I'm not actually going to show too many examples in the UI. One, because it's teeny tiny bits, they don't really translate well to presentations unless I'm doing full-on capture, and it's very boring. And two, for the most part, they are so ubiquitous, you'll know what I'm talking about. Hamburger, anyone? Okay, product anti-pattern number one, the vow of silence. As an app, it will almost certainly have a mystery meat menu icon. It will probably be a light slate gray in the right-hand corner of an otherwise dark slate gray home screen. There may be an array of simple line icons. They will not tell you what they mean. There may be a simple illustration or maybe a repeating video of a guy hiking before cutting to a woman smiling at her coffee in a Scandinavian coffee shop. Tap me, the design is meant to say. Explore my many crevices. The thing is, this kind of worked back in about 2013, when the idea of doing anything more than playing Candy Crush on your phone was for design nerds, developer geeks, and VC dudes. You could be minimalist and use the thinnest typeface visible to the human eye for your logo. You were a designer, designing for other designers, because when would your grandma be using a digital anything? The vow of silence is essentially too cool to tell you what it does and how to do it. Being helpful is for losers. I haven't done it for a while, but it used to be pretty illuminating checking out things like Dribbble and Reddit for the new grads coming through and aspiring UX designers redesigning things like airplane boarding passes, bank sign-ups, and sometimes government services they've been annoyed by. Inevitably, they'd be trying to cut down on the noise and create more white space. And I get where they're coming from, because those things can be really ugly. But each time, I'd find they'd assume that the noise, by which I mean the information those things exist to share or collect, must be secondary to having fewer things on one surface. But here in 2024, very, very few things are served by taking stuff away so much as refactoring the content itself to be clearer to scan and find what's needed, using things like varied headings, subheadings, bullet points. I will return to this point, I promise. The evolution of number one is pattern number two, the sticky bandage, a plaster, a Band-Aid. I did try to find and make sure this is right in Portuguese. I went and checked in a chemist. Was I right? Nope. See, this is what you get for trying, you see. Don't bother. All right. Anyway, so maybe the design started off as a cool, clean, desperately understated like the vow of silence. Or maybe it was some kind of form or intake that was replicated from analog to digital form with no changes. Whatever it is, there is a discoverability problem. People can't find what to do, and so they don't know how amazing this product is at solving the problems they have. This is upsetting the product team because task completion is poor and adoption is low. And it's upsetting marketing because users can't find the features they saw in a great review that was published last month. The solution, apparently, is a carousel of features as an interrupting interstitial, and also a tour. Everyone loves a tour. The tour is a series of sticky notes that ping you about, highlighting all the amazing things you could do if, you just applied yourself a bit harder, please, user. There's red pen scribbles drawing circles around empty boxes, like an overly anxious flatmate trying to point out that clean glasses go in the left-hand cupboard. There is not an interstitial nor a product tour that people have ever truly sat through. Skip, donk, oh, I still don't know what to do. That time and money would be better invested in creating a better interface with clearer inline instructions, breaking down steps and progress. If you take one practical thing away from this talk, it's this. Don't layer hints or directions on top or conceal them in tooltips. Anything that a user needs to complete the task should be visible on load. Number three. Of course, here we are in the era of AI, and never in the history of digital software have we ever had... Okay, all right. So maybe we have been here before, but I'd wager never before have there been so many pings and bloops and dings and donks as 100,000 unwanted chatbots powered by AI are belched into life. How can I help you today? How can I help you today? How can I help you today? I'd wager the Venn diagram of people demanding chatbots be wedged into products to save money on support staff and people who yell, agent, agent, into any phone tree conversation is a flat circle. And yet, there's so much I could go into here. I could do another 30 minutes about using probabilistic solutions for deterministic problems, or simply to state that if you're shoveling shitty, inaccurate, unstructured content in, you're going to get chatbots selling carts for $5. Oh, wait, that one already happened. And there's something extremely funny to me that there is an inherent expectation that users should suddenly be asking very precise questions. Sorry, prompt engineering. Search engines, my own employer, more than most, have taught people that if they slap Holiday Portugal Sunny into a search bar, they'll get results. Alas, internal search on sites is rarely as good, especially at enterprise scale. But you know what large language models are really good at? Interpreting and expanding questions, asking clarifying questions based on information they have. So much in the world of support has a definite answer and doesn't need an AI-generated Barstool reckon. But large language models can be a great interpolation layer and reroute people to the definitive answers they're looking for by helping them shape the right question step by step. But let's all just agree that chatbots are table stakes. In fact, chatbots are an absolute paucity of imagination and ambition. Boring. Large language models and large task models can be truly wondrous things. I'm so lucky and horrified to be working at Google at this moment of AI in so many ways. Because we're only looking at about 3% of the capability and capacity of what's available. So let me tackle this from a product experience perspective of supporting users. Rather than implementing help in an annoying chirping block in the corner of any site or product, what if we used new product surfaces and patterns, like natural language assistance in transforming forms into something more conversational, not a conversation, but more conversational. And that explained why a business is asking for one kind of data or another, so users have the context of how their data is being used. What if, with the help of a domain-trained large language model, inline help adjusted itself and narrowed down options and directions as a user completes more of a given task? What if, and I know it's a big ask, we never sodding used another bloody tooltip ever again, and instead, interfaces adjusted and made space for more information for new users, less for regular users? Your designers, I really fully believe that you and I together can design better than what we're being offered right now. Don't design what you wouldn't use, at least until you've tried to sell in an alternative. Number 4. This brings me to product copy anti-pattern number 4. Though this one often runs a lot deeper than just the product copy. I mentioned how before it can feel like we design for one user, but it might be more accurate to say we design for the user in front of us, or at least in the forefront of our mind that's represented in the problem that we're seeing. The trouble is we have many users, whole systems of user groups that must pull and push from our tools and products, and they're chained to other tools and products as well. And when teams of designers are often spread across different parts of a product, a unified experience is almost impossible. And besides, different user groups deserve different experiences. I don't mean different quality, I mean just adapted to their requirements. And yet I feel we've made very little progress towards this on the whole. Machine learning for personalization has mostly been focused on narrower and narrower targeted segments for marketing. But I think it's time we start thinking about how our UI should adapt to these different user groups as well, and how we can bring information in real time through that. Right now, we design in silos, and then it all kludges together in some sort of kind of goopy navigational soup of 1,000 drop-downs, all genuinely vitally important to someone because someone somewhere uses it. Here comes maybe my biggest provocation. I think that user experience as a discipline lionizes the experience of any individual user over the health of the system the user is part of. And I see this most clearly in large products and enterprise software that I work in. Let me give you an example. So an effort is made, a prototype is created of a new feature, and the user is shown a couple of different versions. Which do you prefer, the user is asked, and asked to choose between an open text box and a set of structured questions and directions. The individual almost always chooses the easiest option, the skippable text box. Easy design, easy to implement, easy to use. Win, 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 right? Except other parts of this system and this tool uses the data from that in other ways, sometimes in ways that are currently invisible to most users. And so it becomes a tragedy of the commons. And now the data is crap because the calculation didn't factor in all the risks. The product team was focused on their user group and not the systems of users as a whole, but the trust in the data in that system is severely diminished. And so then people don't bother to update because they assume other people aren't updating because it's always out of date, and so it becomes hard to come back from. Now, I'm not saying we should give up and make it hard for users, but successfully meeting the surface needs of individual users is almost always a poor indicator of the long-term effectiveness of a tool and the data that you're getting from it. Again, I'm not saying be a huge dick and make it as hard as possible to get things done. What I am saying is that we should be working towards interfaces where we have the space to contextualize complexity in those cases, not try and sweep it under a dozen menus, tooltips, and side panels for the sake of white space. As far as possible, anything that's integral to a user's understanding, again, should be visible on load, or at least very, very clearly indicated where they find that, and within appropriate space. If I had $1 for every time I heard, it's a lot of text, isn't it? With zero reference to whether that text is actually doing some bloody heavy lifting for some shitty product failings, well, I'd have bought a megaphone by now to yell back, have you considered that it may be you who is the problem in this scenario? And finally, this one digs deep into our expectations of the skill set of user experience practitioners, particularly designers. Design is not art. Now, it can involve art, and it often does, but it is not itself art. Design is a craft. It is the manifestation of intent to get to a particular outcome. And I feel like a lot of designers drop the ball on the most important part of what they're there to do. It's not to make sleek interfaces with minimal words, only to have to jam in instructions and motivation and whatever's left over. It's not to give over core parts of the experience to sidecar assistants that no one wants to talk to, or to assume that the frictionless path with the fewest words is always the right one. A designer's primary job is to communicate information in a way that supports user intention and action. I love the idea of design systems, and I hate working with them in practice, because they're about as realistic to me as building the Eiffel Tower with a box of toddler's blocks most of the times. Very few use real content to stress test them. For example, to really explore what happens to components when things are in translation, or stress test what happens when a table that was mocked up to show 6 names looks like and performs like when there's suddenly 60 names. And the moment there's a sticker sheet for easy mock-ups, then I get really antsy. The reality is, to most stakeholders, a high-fidelity wireframe looks 95% done. Engineering starts guesstimating builds, suddenly there are 75 story points for next Tuesday, and meanwhile, the UX content designer probably hasn't had a look-in. And even for simpler design systems, the ones that are kind of closer to pattern libraries, if you aren't using established UX writing patterns for buttons, login screens, form field validation, etc., then you aren't saving any time, because these are the things that stakeholders and subject matter experts love to debate more than anything else. And you certainly aren't saving your writers any time, who have to spend their time relitigating things around access labels and so on. You've probably heard that old hoary chestnut of UX being a blocker or slowing velocity or some such. The writers, I feel, get the real sharp end of this one, because we're usually left working out the unhappy path. What happens if things don't load properly? How should validation be displayed? What happens when there are 60 names displayed? Like, do you want to have recency bias by showing the most recent interactions, or alphabetical bias by showing people by surname? And a billion other things that we have to tie up and consider. And the brutal reality is users will fuck up more often than they're successful, especially with a new tool or site. Trying to ignore that in favor of designing the perfect experience that, again, statistically speaking, very few users will have, especially if the ideal is it's so easy, no one needs instructions. That's poor design, and it's poor design work, and I expect my colleagues in the industry to do better, basically. And I tell them that every single time I walk into a room. I'm dead popular, can you tell? Have we thought about the unhappy path yet, or are you just designing nice things? So, if you really want to be a better user experience practitioner that is designing for users, not round them, start with writing out what users in each of your different user groups need to know to be successful navigating your site or using your tool. And then tell them. Make the space in your interface for what they need to know as they need to know it. Not in a help center, not in a bot, not a hover card over a form field. Find ways of communicating the information your users need to be able to take the actions they need to do. The days of pixel-perfect design have been gone for a while, I think it's fair to say. And the days of predictable one-size-fits-all experiences are pretty much done too. AI is bringing even more ambiguity into this picture. But if we can harness this moment that we're in, we could create better, more imaginative ways of supporting our users. It could be incredible. But for real, it's time to get comfortable with messy, with truly flexible, truly responsive content and design that changes to help users in real time reacting to what they are doing. 3 bullet points and a button ain't going to cut it in the future. In some ways, our sites and products will be more like the Winchester Mystery House than ever. Just remember to make the shower adjustable to all heights. Thank you very much.